This is going to be about the parable taught in The Wizard of Oz. I learned this in a mainline economics class. We spent a whole day talking about the history of The Wizard of Oz. It was a story of populism, and at the time, it was covering there was uncertainty, and the way we based our money was in flux. Remember, Andrew Jackson had thrown all the international bankers out, and they kept trying to get their claws back into the American economy. And so this was a story of populism written by Frank Baum. Now, the parable of these teaching is only germane to the very first Wizard of Oz books. He thought it was, he did it to teach kids how money was created. And here's this is a metallic copy of what they had in bookstores. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the funniest children's book ever published. Well, it really wasn't meant to do that. He just made these colorful characters to teach kids what was going on in the economy and how money was made. So I'd like to cover that parable that he's teaching in there. And so let's go over through. So Dorothy goes to Oz. Now in the book's a little different than the movie. The movie was one of the first colorized mainline movies to reach out to children. There were obviously colored cartoons at the time, but in the book she's wearing silver slippers, not ruby slippers. They changed to ruby because it would show up good on color, and the producers of the film weren't actually trying to teach children about. They were just trying to make a buck, and they ran with the story for that reason. And so this is only about the first book. The subsequent book's nothing. And I'm going to go over this little list here, this board here, so you can go back and just freeze the frame, and you can. And I'm going to cover everything that's on here. So let's go through what happened. So Dorothy is with Toto, and they land in Oz, and then she meets the good witch Glinda after remember, her house lands on top of one of the evil witches, and she dies. And then one of the wicked witches die, and Glinda takes her silver slippers off. Remember, they're ruby in the movie, but in the book they're silver slippers, and puts it on Dorothy. And she says, as long as you have the slippers on, the evil witch can't touch you. And the evil witches represented the international bankers, the strong ones. They wanted all the silver and gold, and the house even represents the housing. If you want to look what happened in 2007-8, the financial crisis, it started with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and so the evil banks, some of them failed, but their assets were gobbled up by the other evil banks. So let's go over some of the characters in there. So there's the Munchkins, and the Munchkins represent the city folk. They're, happy-go-lucky, as it were, but kind of clueless to what's really going on around them. Then let's cover some of the people. So she's on the yellow brick road, and they say follow the yellow brick road, and then you're going to go to the land to the Emerald City to meet the wizard. Well, the yellow brick road is gold, and her silver slippers. So silver and gold, that's a pretty obvious allusion to money. And here's the catch. So silver and gold are measured in ounces, but they aren't abbreviated OU, they're abbreviated OZ. Now, Frank Baum admitted, or said later, when he was trying to figure out the name of the Wizard of Oz, he looked at a filing cabinet and said O to Z, but I think he did that because he started making so much money writing the books that he lost sight of what his original intention was, and he didn't want to be controversial. And plus, by that time, the the Federal Reserve Act had been passed through by Woodrow Wilson, and the international bankers were back in power, so he didn't want to piss anybody off that could, have him killed, since there was a lot of people killed after the Federal Reserve Act was enacted to buy into the system and shut everybody up. So the first person she runs into is the Scarecrow, and he's emblematic or symbolic of the American farmer. Now he's goes to Oz to get a brain, but he isn't really stupid. Remember, the American farmer was kind of the Renaissance man at the time. He could work on he was into animal husbandry. He was an amateur vet. He knew about crops, harvesting, selling stuff, working on various pieces of farm equipment. He just worked so hard he didn't have time to study all this minutia of everything. And then they run into the Tin Woodsman. Well, the Tin Woodsman is symbolic of industry. And so he's stuck there in the field, and what's the first thing that comes out of his mouth is oil. So they lubricate him, and he gets moving again. Well, so industry doesn't work without oil. That was true then. It's true now. So the Tin Woodsman represents industry, and much like now, you can talk all you want about solar power and wind power, but without oil, there really is no industry. It takes 18-wheelers to transport everything, and there are no electric 18-wheelers anywhere. Then let's go over another one of the things. So they run into the Cowardly Lion here, and he's emblematic of a man named William Jennings Bryan. That's who he represents. Now, William Jennings Bryan railed against the problem with the system, the money system. There was a crisis in 1873, the Silver Crisis, and it was they were really unresolved on how they were going to set up the money. And he railed about it. He ran for president. There was also several significant court cases he was involved in. Didn't have anything to do with this. You can check it out. William Jennings Bryan, very interesting character. But he represented that's who the Cowardly Lion was. Let's go over the wizard. So the Wizard of Oz lives in the Emerald City, where all the money comes from, the green. And so the wizard's a twofold character. He's this guy with I am the great and powerful Oz. Well, this is the president. But the real guy behind the president is a normal-looking guy in a hat, and this guy represents the money guys. They even have him dressed like one of the Rothschilds. So the international bankers were trying to get in their claws into everything. And of course, if you go to Washington, you've got to run into the gatekeeper. So you got to grease the wheels to get in to see the wizard. And before Dorothy goes into the to see the wizard there, she runs into a poppy field and she passes out and goes to sleep. Well, right at the time this was written, there was the Opium War, the Boxer Rebellion happened, where the British Empire, which at the time was running the world, they handed off to us basically at Bretton Woods in 1944 at the end of World War II as the new world power, even though we're basically the same country. The British wanted to sell opium, the precursor to heroin, to the Chinese, and they didn't want it. Well, the British basically just kicked their ass and started, revving up the heroin or opium production and selling it to the Chinese. I mean, that's one of the reasons we're in Afghanistan. Yes, it's centrally located as a forward base against Iran or the Russians, but the reason we got the Taliban out of power was because they stopped opium production. That's how CIA makes a lot of their money is opium. And so that's what the Field of Poppy represents. And then in the book, she goes through 7 halls and 3 flights of stairs. Now, my professor at the time he brought it up, but he didn't think it had anything to do with that, but I think it is coding for that. And then, you got the evil witch, and she represents the banking system. And then she had the flying monkeys, which represented the American Indians. And remember, the West wasn't totally closed at the time he wrote this book, and they used the flying monkeys. They were taking all their stuff away from them, and they were the boogeyman of the time. I want to bring up a couple of other things, 3 things specifically. So, Toto, the little dog in the book, had quite the film career. Her real name was Terry. Here's a book you can get at Half Price Books. Pretty interesting. By the way, that clicking sound in the back is my dog, Mr. Spock, running back and forth. So Toto had quite the career. It's listed in here. She was in 2 Shirley Temple movies and a couple of pirate movies and mystery movies. Then there's a book called The Fourth Turning that I would like you to read. It's an older book. I've kind of torn this one up. But pretty interesting. It talks about the length of cycles, super cycles in the American economy. And I want to bring up one last thing. Here's a copy of my website here, timbosplace.com, and I've got a link to this theory on page 1. Just click on The Wizard of Oz. But then if you play the Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, if you start it on the Third War of the Lion, it kind of follows The Wizard of Oz. They did that on purpose. Okay, thank you. I'm out.